129 of the Standing Committee on International Trade. Pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted by the committee on Monday, September the 23rd, 24, the committee is resuming its study of recent developments concerning the Canada-United States lumber trade dispute. We have with us today Groupe Labelle and it's Louis-Frédéric Labelle, video conference, President and Chief Executive Officer. From the Ontario Forest Industries Association, Ian Dunn, President and Chief Executive Officer. From the United Steelworkers, Jeff Bromley, Chair of Wood Council by video conference. Welcome to you all. Thank you for being with us today. We will start with opening remarks and then proceed with rounds of questions. You have up to 5 minutes. Mr. Labelle, I invite you to speak to the committee for up to 5 minutes, please.
Alors, bonjour tout le monde.
Hello, everyone. My name is Frédéric Labelle. I'm the president of the Labelle Group. We're a family company that's been working in lumber for over 60 years. Mainly in Bas-Saint-Laurent, eastern Quebec. We also have manufacturing operations in Ontario, New Brunswick, and in the state of Maine in the U.S. We employ 1,200 people in Canada, and we are one of the 15 largest lumber producers in North America. We have 2 factories that are close to the Quebec-U.S. border. These are factories that get most of the resources from the U.S. that go through pathways that were made just for this. So these are sawmills that are a part of the border mill group, as we call it. There are several sawmills along the border, and they all have the same status, and they do most of their procurement in the U.S. Before, these sawmills had a specific status. We have gone through a lot of conflict with the U.S., and through this, we have not necessarily had to pay the same tariffs. Since 2017, unfortunately, we lost this status, or rather, they didn't implement it again. So today, we have the same status and face the same issues as the rest of Canada. This means that today, the Americans are putting a charge on their own wood. So today, when we export to the U.S., we have to pay a tariff. The U.S. consumers are actually paying a tariff on their own products at the end of the day. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Dunn, please.
Thank you, merci, Madam Chair. My name is Ian Dunn. I am the President and CEO of the Ontario Forest Industries Association. I'm also a registered professional forester. I represent over 50 member companies in the province, which manage over 22 million hectares of public forest and mills that produce energy, electricity, engineered wood products, pulp, paper, and of course lumber. Our industry contributes $5.5 billion in GDP, supports 137,000 direct, indirect, and induced jobs, and represents a total tax revenue for all levels of government of $3.3 billion. Since the last agreement ended in 2017, Canadian lumber producers have approximately $10 billion on deposit in the United States, over $900 million from Ontario. This large amount of capital could be used to reinvest in local operations and communities, improving our competitiveness. The current iteration of the softwood lumber trade dispute is likely the largest global dispute since the end of the Second World War. Like other Canadian jurisdictions, over the last 20 years, Ontario's forest products sector has faced many challenges. We have seen industry consolidation and rationalization, investment dollars and capacity moving to lower cost jurisdictions, volatile commodity prices, and supply chain disruptions. And of course, unfair and illegal trade action by the United States, our biggest and most important trading partner. What has this meant for Ontario? What has this meant to the communities of Hornpain, White River, Dryden, Dubreuilville? Well, it's meant that the volume of trees sustainably harvested in the province has been cut in half from 28 million cubic meters to 13 million cubic meters most recently. Contribution to the GDP has fallen by approximately $2 billion. Since the early 2000s, employment in the industry has fallen by half, from 80,000 direct jobs to around 40,000 today. Most recently, I've been hearing from some of our members who will be reducing their operating schedule as a result of increased costs, weak pricing, and anticipated duties for 2025. With others announcing further layoffs and closures, many small, family-run, independent companies operating in Ontario for generations. One company I spoke with last week, the gentleman, his family has held a license to cut crown timber in Ontario for 110 years, and he will likely be the last person to hold that license. At a recent convention, a representative of the U.S. industry recently stated, and I quote, "From the U.S. perspective, the softwood lumber trade case has been effective, extremely effective, yielding results that one would expect. Since 2016, Canadian mills have accounted for 60% of mill closures by capacity. U.S. mills account for 79% of expansions, while Canadian mills account for only 14%. U.S. mills accounted for 98% of new mill capacity, while Canadian mills accounted only for 3%. End quote. This has occurred in an environment of duties between 8 to 20%. The forecasted rate of 30% for August of 2025 is a dramatic increase. It will likely threaten the profitability and viability of many Ontario sawmills already anxious about access to capital and liquidity. And of course, it's not just the small sawmilling industry that is impacted by lumber duties. Pulp and paper is typically made using the residuals generated as a byproduct of making lumber. With this valuable feedstock, the ability of Canadian pulp and paper mills to make this product becomes more challenging and more expensive. In Ontario, over 1 year, we have seen the idling of 2 pulp and paper mills and the permanent closure of a containerboard mill in Trenton. In 2006, there were 16 pulp and paper mills in Ontario. There are currently 3 operating. Despite the challenges, Ontario is the only jurisdiction in Canada that has seen a substantial increase in lumber export rates to the United States. New and exciting opportunities exist in biomaterials and bioenergy that could bring new investment and economic development opportunities to Indigenous and non-Indigenous communities across the province. Our forests are abundant, productive, and sustainably managed. Ontario's forest industry is resilient, innovative, and essential to our economy, communities, and environment. However, it is clear that the ongoing softwood lumber trade dispute, compounded by other economic challenges, continues to hamper our full potential. So we call on all levels of government to focus on boosting the competitiveness of our sector, continue legal efforts while pursuing negotiations, and end this dispute. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dunn. On to Mr. Bromley, please.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair. My name is Jeff Bromley. I am the United Steelworkers Wood Council Chair, comprised of approximately 14,000 members across this country from Quebec, Ontario, and west through Manitoba, Saskatchewan, Alberta, and of course British Columbia, where I'm calling in from today. The impact, I will not go over or reiterate the numbers that my counterpart from Ontario had just repeated, but the impact of the 8-year softwood lumber dispute between the two countries on both my membership, forestry workers as a whole, and those largely rural communities that they work and live in has been far-reaching, wide, and in fact devastating. In terms of the amount of direct jobs in terms of steelworkers, we believe that there has been approximately 2,500 to 3,000 direct jobs that have been impacted over the last 8 years, largely due to the increasing costs that the lumber duties have put upon our industry, and in fact made those operations and logging operations, harvesting, uneconomical. And clearly, it's the long-standing dispute over the last 8 years. It is time that our government stands up for one of the pillars of our Canadian industry, and certainly a pillar of the province that I'm in British Columbia, and because it has been devastating. And I'll focus on a couple of recent announcements I've spent 30 years in this industry, both 18 years in the manufacturing of a small, or not a small mill, a medium-sized operation in southeast corner of British Columbia in Elko, to the last 12 years advocating on behalf of my membership, both in locally in British Columbia and across the nation. And the latest announcements by Canfor in 2 communities in British Columbia, both in Vanderhoof with the Plateau Mill and in Fort St. John with the Canfor Fort St. John Mill, in approximately 30 days, both of those mills will close, and the impact will be far-reaching. Those communities are about 10,000 people each, and there's going to be 500 direct jobs that are lost. And for the most part, those mills cannot operate due to obviously the ever increasing duties and tariffs and lumber tariffs set upon by the U.S. And of course, as my counterpart mentioned, next year at this time, or in the summer of 2025, it's expected that those duties currently sitting around 14% on average across the nation will at least double to the 28, possibly the 30% range, which will mean a devastating impact to the industry. I would be very surprised of any operation that will be able to continue to run under those circumstances. It is an acute attention that is needed to try to address this, to try and find a solution, to have the Americans come to the table and try to find a reasonable trade solution to these, in my opinion, these illegal duties and these unfair duties to our industry that is unfairly accused of being subsidized by the powerful U.S. softwood lumber lobby. And I think that the attention needs to be focused by our Canadian government on trying to find a solution as the devastation to the communities and jobs is going to get worse. Thank you.
All right, thank you all very much. We will now open it up for the members. Mr. Martel for 6 minutes, please.
Oui, merci.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Lebel is with us, correct? Yes. Just wanted to be sure. So the lumber industry is very important in Quebec and throughout Canada for our economy. On top of this, the Minister of Environment wants to create a new order. So the industry is significantly impacted. And now there are these tariffs being imposed by the United States. And now Trump is threatening implementing a 25% tariff. So this is not good news, and things are not looking bright. Mr. Lebel, after 9 years of this government, this current government, negotiations without an agreement, 3 different American presidents have gone by in this time. Do you have much confidence in this government's ability to effectively negotiate to protect the lumber industry? What I've understood here is that there have not been serious negotiations with our American counterparts. The federal government has to negotiate this agreement. This is not in the hands of the provinces or companies. We can see that the government's position at the beginning aimed at managing this issue through the courts. Now, it's been 9 years. I think that the conclusion is that this is not working through the courts, and we're going to not have enough cash flow. And we're at $10 billion now instead of $5 billion. That's in question now. So I would expect this government to go back or try to go back to the negotiation table. So these 25% tariffs, if they are implemented, will you be able to survive? When I look at this, my question is there an opportunity for you to survive? Well, since we heard this news earlier in the week on the customs tariffs, We've had several meetings within the company. We need to prepare ourselves for this. The first reflex we had was to see if our American clients that make up about 50% of our sales of lumber, we had to see if they would be able to pay this tariff. And of course, if things don't work out on the market, there will be a lot of closures. So let's try to be very concrete with what we're saying here. If we take the 25% tariff, could you give me a number? How many jobs in your Quebec factories would be lost potentially? I would say, I have about 800 workers in Quebec and New Brunswick that work directly in the sawmills, and that could be directly affected by these tariffs if we can't afford them or if the client decides they don't want to pay them. So to go back to the question, if last November we came to an agreement, what impact would this have had on your product's competitiveness and your ability to expand your projects? And my question is, if we would have came to an agreement at the beginning of when this government came into power. Well, I don't want to invent anything, but we have more than 100,000 Canadian dollars, or million rather dollars, in deposits. So that's, like I said, more than $100 million for the Lebel Group in deposits. So if we were able to access this money, we would have invested it into our sawmills. And so we would be more competitive because our factories would be modernized. Do I still have time, Madam Chair? About a minute? Okay. My next question will be for our other witness, Mr. Samre. What will be the consequences on rural communities with these tariffs? We know that this will highly affect workers and rural communities because it's hard in many cases for them to find jobs in these remote areas.
Monsieur Samre.
Mr. Samre?
Dans le deuxième, OK, excusez-moi.
He's on the second panel. Sorry. Sorry about that. Okay, I'll come back to that. Thank you.
Mr. Sadu, please.
Thank you. Thanks, Madam Chair, and thanks to our witnesses for being here today on this very important study. Our government has been very mindful in its deliberations when it comes to any trade negotiations, and our priority has always been to secure a good deal for Canadian workers and Canadian industry. I know the opposition's approach is to get a deal regardless of what's at stake here, and I'd like to maybe turn to Mr. Dunn first. Would you agree that a good deal is better than a fast deal? And in your opinion, what would constitute a good deal?
So in order to get a deal, we think there's going to be three elements. There's going to be the border measures. There will likely be some return of duties to the Americans, and thirdly, the funding of meritorious initiatives to increase domestic consumption. We would agree we don't want a deal at any costs, but certainly looking at all the compounding economic factors for lumber producers in Ontario, be it the closure of pulp and paper mills, the idling of pulp and paper mills, the lack of markets for residuals, weak pricing, etc. It's becoming very, very important that government pursues negotiations and secures a settlement.
Thank you for that. And maybe I can turn to Mr. Bromley online.
Hello. Same.
Sorry, the question was, in terms of, in your opinion, what would be a good deal to you with the U.S.?
Well, my philosophical opinion is that it should be free and fair trade. Obviously, that's pie in the sky, and that's not reasonable, or sorry, it's not achievable. I mean, in terms of the deal that was negotiated from 2006 and finally expired January 1, 2017, I think that managed the situation probably as best as could be expected. It was more of a sliding scale. And I think that so in terms of if lumber prices were high, there was no duties or there was no monetary compensation paid. And if lumber lumber prices were low, then there was a certain amount of duties paid. So it was more of a fairer system. And so I believe that ultimately that's the goal that we need to pursue. However, the position that my counterpart mentioned about the softwood lumber lobby from the U.S., he was speaking at a conference here in Vancouver, and the position that he took flat out and said that there will be no money coming back of those duties, that $10 billion amount, to the Canadian companies that it's owed to. And I think that's obviously a position that we cannot never agree to. That a portion of those monies should be coming obviously back to the companies that paid them. And I believe that if not all of it, then something needs to come back in terms to from a Canadian government to manage so let's say a fund that would produce innovation in our industry. There are many opportunities in our industry to produce mass timber, things of that nature, and these punitive duties, as my counterpart mentioned, it forces them, they're not able to invest in new technology and technologies that produce more value out of the products or out of the timber that we harvest here in Canada. So I think that a deal is, there's lots of ways that we could certainly achieve that, but I think that the pressure now is so great that we're not necessarily negotiating from a position of strength. Because the threat of those 25% or 30% duties next year, the existing duties, and then having them double, I can't see how, like I said before in my opening, how there's going to be any operation that's going to be able to continually run in that environment.
Okay. And maybe if I can turn to Mr. LaBelle. Mr. LaBelle, the question for you again is, in your opinion, what would constitute a good deal with the U.S. on softwood lumber?
Écoutez, nous,
Well, firstly, we want to be able to access the deposits that we made that we are owed. Like I said, we have sawmills on the border that are working a lot with the Americans. In Quebec, we are the largest buyers working with the U.S. right now for softwood lumber. So we have these crown forests, but as soon as we're working with private forests, I don't think that we should be paying any taxes and we should be fully reimbursed. So that's my first point. My second point is that we need to have fair trade. So we're paying these significant duties, but over in Europe, they're actually developing their market. And they've kind of taken our market shares with the U.S. And they have no restrictions, no duties. So we don't think that this makes any sense. Like I said earlier, we have been working for about 60 years, and we've been exporting to the U.S. for the last 50 years. And we are right at the border, and so it doesn't make any sense that we're not able to export our products there. Now, from the American perspective, the concern is about, for them, protecting their market shares. As my colleague explained, the American producers have taken advantage of this crisis that they created to expand their industry, especially in the southern states. What we've seen is that this expansion might be coming to an end because they're slowly running out of raw materials to manufacture. So for us, this allows us to think about a way in which we can limit our exports, either through tariffs or quotas, or maybe both, with a hybrid measure to show the Americans that we will not be harming the American market when demand is low.
Very much. Madame Chabot. Please, the floor.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you very much to all of our witnesses. The softwood lumber issue is an issue that unfortunately we have not been able to resolve over many years, but we are looking for solutions. My question will be for Mr. Bromley with the United Steelworkers. So the Lumber Council with the United Steelworkers have put pressure on the federal government for us to implement 5 changes to the Softwood Lumber Action Plan. You have requested that we offer loan guarantees to companies, or loan securities for those who have paid tariffs on wood that has been exported to the United States. Is this still one of your requests?
Yes, I wouldn't waver from that request. Simply, I mean, it's to the point now where the Americans continually believe that our industry is subsidized, and if that's the case, if they're going to try and cripple our industry, we might as well have our government support those companies in terms of the ability to at least achieve or recapture some of those duties so that they can reinvest and can make our industry more vibrant, and so they can, in some cases, survive.
On voit que la situation
We can see that the situation has not improved since then. Duties have been increased in August, and there are the recent threats from Donald Trump to increase tariffs and apply this to all imports. Do you have any additional requests with these changes?
It's in terms of the changes or the tariffs that Trump announced yesterday or day before, whatever it was. I'm not entirely sure how that 25% will impact the softwood lumber duties and tariffs, whether or not it's going to be 25% on top of what's already announced or what's already in place. And if that's the case, that, again, I'd be surprised to see any operation continually running anywhere across the country. So in terms of, so I need to understand the question, because if there's any other avenues that we could go down in light of those duties, again, support from the federal government, first and foremost, to make this its #1 priority in terms of the trade file with the U.S., which I'll be honest with you, I'm not feeling that the softwood lumber dispute over the last 8 years has been the #1 priority. So that first and foremost, but secondly, so that have stopgap measures such as loan guarantees, such of initiatives like that, so that the companies can survive this situation, and the workers continue to work. Again, like I said, mostly in small rural communities, no different than I was up in Chibougamau with the Chantiers group last week, and all small communities like those are going to be really, really devastated if this continues.
Oui, bien sûr, c'est des industries assez.
Yes, of course, these are essential industries, and raw materials is important in Quebec. Would you agree that in 2020, with the CUSMA review, do you think that we missed an opportunity? Did the government miss the opportunity to come to a better agreement? And then we're going to be reviewing CUSMA in 2026, but we have to start thinking about this early on. It seems as though the government wasn't strict enough to protect this industry. So do you have any suggestions for this 2026 review? I know it was a long question.
Qui mérite peut-être une longue réponse.
And maybe there will be a long answer as well.
First and foremost, I think that there's been a missed opportunity, and we've had free trade between the 2 countries, and now the 3 countries, Canada, U.S., and Mexico. 1987 for the original free trade agreement, and now most recently the review with the CUSMA. And I think it was a missed opportunity. Softwood lumber has always been excluded unfairly in terms of in the trade agreements, and I think that has to be a priority. for them to be included, because for it to be excluded and outside that process, it excludes us from, at least on paper anyways, from trying to dispute these tariffs. It excludes us from a number of processes that other industries within Canada that are part of that agreement. So yes, I very much support that and think that it was a missed opportunity, to answer your question.
Merci.
Thank you.
Right, please.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for being present with us today. Of course, the news coming from our American counterparts in the United States is deeply troubling. It's an attack on our industries, it's an attack on our workers, it's an attack on the ability for a strong North America. It's deeply concerning to New Democrats, concerning to unions right across this country, and it's something that I think that we as Canadians have to take seriously. As we heard from already, the witnesses have already provided their dismay in relation to the fact that a trade dispute that has originated before I was even born in 1982 is now persisting. A kind of conflict that continues to persist. We've seen, for example, during the period between 1993 and 2000, since 1982, between the periods of 2004 and 2009, we had already at that point almost 10,000 direct and indirect jobs were lost within our forestry sector. I can only imagine the amount of work, the dismay workers feel right across this country, knowing that we have decades of inaction now related to the very extraordinary exception related to free trade of lumber to the United States. I take, Mr. Bromley, your statements quite seriously in relation to the fact that this has been an ongoing issue. It was an issue in the last free trade agreement we signed. It was an issue before the last free trade agreement. It's an issue again today. The hyper-exceptionality based on this one fact, which is that this Crown lands issue with the United States, calling it a great big subsidy for all of our industries here, is their problem. Since 1982, this has been something they've said was unfair. It's something that I think we as Canadians take great pride in terms of how we organize our land and natural resources towards public good, towards ensuring that our public coffers actually benefit from the sale of our great natural resources here in North America, here in Canada. And I think that's something that the Americans just simply don't understand. I think we need to have a very strong approach, a united approach that addresses some of the very original issues related to this very large trade dispute. And we should continue now to build off of some of the arguments that are already present to Canadians. We know, for example, what Mr. Donald Trump wants. It's like a scary movie, this guy. We've watched this scary movie before. He was the president once already. The great advantage we as Canadians have now today is the fact that this scary movie, we know when the jumps are. We know when the scary parts of this film are going to take place. We knew these tariffs were going to come. We knew that Southern conservatives would try to do this. We should have had the ability to organize our labor, organize our management, and organize our industries towards a better outcome. Some of the recommendations made by the United Steelworkers, for example, on liquidity fund to shore up some of the very serious issues of being unable to access capital could be met. That's something we could do today. We could do that right now to shore up some of our industries and prevent any job losses. Mr. Bromley, with the recent news of Trump's plan to impose a 25% tariff on all Canadian exports, and I take your point, which is we aren't even certain whether or not it's 25% plus the existing 14, which would bring us above that. That's something the Prime Minister should have asked in his phone call and something he should ask today. But what does this actually mean for the union members of the United Steelworkers? I'm sure they're very worried right now. And what are their fears? And what are you hearing from the shop floor from our brothers and sisters who are working so diligently while under a very serious threat?
Well, the first question is where are their paychecks? Are they going to be able to continue, or are they going to be a layoff or even suffering permanent closure? As not far from, or up in your neck of the woods in northeastern BC, across the border, the Fort St. John mill I referenced, that mill is going to close almost completely due to the current and pending softwood lumber duties. It's not about fiber supply. There's a good fiber basket out there. It's not about a workforce or a lack of a workforce. There's a good workforce in Fort St. John. But that Canfor has came out and said that mill closure is almost completely due to the softwood lumber tariffs increasing this year and doubling next year. And so to your question, they're wondering how they're going to pay their mortgages. They're wondering how they'll pay their bills. I hearken back to the point I'm making about our folks, our membership living in largely rural communities, and it's not as easy these days in a housing market where you just can't sell your house and move to Vancouver or move to even Edmonton and Calgary. You can't just pick up and move your house. You need to. It's not that easy anymore. And so largely these folks, if they lose their jobs, they'll have to find work. Maybe they'll be working in northern Alberta. I don't know, but they'll have to be then remote work, and it's creating a tremendous amount of stress to my membership for sure.
This is one of the most important industries in Canada. We're a country that exports raw material. We're a country that prides ourselves on being able to supply not just America, but the world with good materials. We are literally building the planet with good Canadian products here. It's a deep shame to see our partners in the United States do something so callous, and I would agree, illegal, to what is supposed to be one of our greatest relationships in the world. What would you suggest in terms of, and this is again to Mr. Mr. Bromley, related to some of the items related to how we deal with Mr. Donald Trump in terms of the upcoming or the now overdue and done Softwood Lumber Action Plan. You had submitted at that time, I'm certain, many recommendations. What recommendations do you think still stand and are present today for that important agreement? And are there lessons learned from that process? And would you recommend any of those processes to deal with this crisis today?
Well, I think
Thank you, Mr. Brown. If you could just make it a brief answer, simply because the members have run out of time. So if you could just give us a brief answer, please, so we can move on to the next member.
I will be brief, and thank you, Madam Chair. And in fact, we talk about a housing crisis across Canada. Well, there's a housing crisis across the U.S. And the simple fact of the matter is that the U.S. cannot supply their 100% of their demand. There's a 30% share of the market share that Canada usually has. They need our resource, and it is impendent upon them to make sure that that lumber gets into that market so they can build the houses and increase the housing supply in the U.S.
Mr. Baldinelli for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the witnesses. You can really hear the frustrations and the comments of our industry stakeholders. Mr. Bromley, in your comments, you said this: it is time for the government to stand up for our industry. And I agree. I mean, it's time to put Canada first. It's time to stand up for Canada and stand up for our workers in the forestry sector and those and those businesses in the forestry sector. My God, it's been 9 years, 3 U.S. presidents, and we're still negotiating. Our previous prime minister, a conservative prime minister, was able to get a deal done in 79 days. I mean, this inaction has cost the sector about $9 billion. I mean, we're going from a 14% tariff currently. There's discussions on that doubling next year. I think just recently now we've had the U.S. president-elect talking about a 25% tariff. You know, our prime minister recently said in the United States, he tells a U.S. audience it's a small issue. But Mr. Bromley, I mean, you tell that to the workers in Vanderhoof and Fort St. John. I mean, that's 500 workers there. I mean, these duties and tariffs, if I had to say a word, it's a devastating impact on those communities and companies, including all those small businesses. I mean, when that announcement was made by Canfor in September, early September, Brian O'Rourke, the president of United Steelworkers Local, I think it was 2017, stated, in a lot of the smaller communities, it's devastating because there are not really transferable jobs within the area. So, Mr. Bromley, how would you assess the Canadian federal government's handling of the softwood lumber negotiations? Do you believe they've adequately protected the interest of BC forestry workers and communities?
I'm going to be blunt, no. As I've mentioned, I've been really yelling from the rooftops about this issue since I assumed this position 6 years ago, not long after this round of the fight started. And the attention paid to, in my opinion, by the federal government during that time has not been sufficient. And it needs to be front of mind. The amount of jobs that have been lost, the amount of devastation to the communities is growing and continues to grow. And there's been it seems like the effort to try and change that narrative has been a bit of a failure, to be quite honest.
You also raised the point about CUSMA and not being negotiated into that agreement. And I was just wondering if you could say anything more about that.
Other than, as I mentioned, in '87, when the first free trade agreement was negotiated with the United States, continually through the variations that now includes Mexico, the softwood lumber product going into the U.S. market has never been a part of that free trade agreement. So ultimately, it's not a free trade agreement because there are exclusions. And it's an abundant shame because within that agreement, however its flaws, there is processes and to be able to dispute that. And we can use processes both at the U.S. Department of Commerce that we can appeal these duties, and you can use the World Trade Council or but when the U.S. deliberately doesn't fill positions so that we can argue in those, we don't have the ability outside these trade agreements.
Thank you.
Including softwood lumber agreements.
Thank you, Mr. Bromley. I want to go to Mr. Dunn. You know, as President and CEO of the Ontario Forest Industries Association, you mentioned you represent 50 companies, about 137,000 direct and indirect jobs. I mean, so what is the impact of the government inaction, the lack of leadership on this file? How does that impact those 137,000 jobs in those small communities that those people live in?
Yeah, thanks for the question, and it already has the answer. So, like I said, there is a mill in Northwest that's taking operational downtime, reduction of shifts, layoffs. There's two smaller family-run businesses kind of in the eastern and central area of the province that will likely be shutting down.
And you mentioned one that's been in business for 110 years with a license, a family-run business that's had a license for 110
the business may not have been around for 110 years, but the family has held a license to cut timber in Ontario for 110 years, and this person will likely be the last person to hold that license.
Thank you very much, sir. Ms. Fortier, please, for 5 minutes.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to our witnesses for being here today, because this is, of course, a very important study, and it allows us to shine a light on the issues that we're facing today. And it allows us to speak with you as witnesses and to give us advice and suggestions to the government, and to give suggestions to partners to find the right approach to come to a resolution here. So my first question will be for all our witnesses. So this dispute between U.S. and Canada has become one of the most long-standing issues between the two countries over the last 25 years. The American softwood lumber industry has looked to gain restrictions from the government on Canadian softwood lumber imports through applying countervailing and anti-dumping duties. So in your opinion, what would be the most useful for Canadian representatives for a potential negotiation in the future? I'll start with Mr. Lebel. I only have 5 minutes, by the way, so I'll ask that you keep your answers rather brief. So it has been many years since we've been in conflict with the Americans, and it's become a sort of business case for us. The provinces are trying to comply with their requests. The rules continue to change, and we're facing a lot of these reoccurring issues. I think that we need to negotiate. I don't think we'll be able to come to an agreement through the courts. I think we need to negotiate in good faith for all those stakeholders, for those in the United States who are paying higher prices on their products. And given climate change, given the fact that we have a housing shortage throughout all of North America, lumber is a part of the solution. Thank you, Mr. Lebel. Mr. Bromley?
I'll go to Mr. Dunn first because of my translation. It's a long question.
Translation as well. So the dispute actually goes back to 1794 with the Jay Treaty between Canada and the United States. So this has been going on for a very, very long time. and you need a willing partner. And as far as we're concerned, it doesn't appear like the U.S. industry is all that interested in negotiations. What I would encourage the government to do is look at what we can control, and that includes a focus on competitiveness, attracting investment, reducing costs. These are things that will help the industry and within the control of provincial and federal governments.
Puis on pourrait faire quoi pour être plus compétitif?
And what could we do to be more competitive? What could we do to be more competitive? If you have any suggestions to share with us, we're looking for recommendations.
Sorry, you'll have to repeat that in English for me.
Non, je peux pas faire ça.
Sorry, I won't be able to do that.
Présidente, j'ai
Madam Chair, how much time do I have? Great. Mr. LaBelle, I will continue with you. Do you have any other recommendations to make for us in terms of how the Canadian government can position itself? As you said in your opening statement, we want to be in a winning position. It's been years that the Canadian government has been working through, like you said, the courts, but there may be other means to do this. You know, we've invested in companies. Are there other things that we can do to support the forestry industry? One of the ways that we could do this, like you said, would be to continue to contribute to the development and the innovation of our industry so that we be able to use lumber products in other sectors that may not currently be acceptable or accessible rather. And so in the last decade, we have implemented a lot of innovation that can be useful for us internally for building homes in Canada, for example, as well as maybe outside of the country, we could convince Americans that this is the way to go. So in terms of government investments, what investments would you like to see to support you in your innovations to be in a winning position? Unfortunately, the federal government's position has been, to defend us through the courts, but it hasn't helped us on a financial level. Oftentimes, we have ideas and projects that we can't implement through the federal level because we have this conflict with the Americans. So it's kind of absurd. We're in a vicious cycle here as a company.
Monsieur Savard Tremblay for 2.5 minutes, please.
Oui, alors bonjour tout le monde.
Hello, everyone. Thank you to all of our witnesses for being here with us today and for their presentations. I'd like to ask my first question for Mr. Bromley from United Steelworkers. So there's a significant impact for workers and communities where there are layoffs and company closures. There's a lot of uncertainty surrounding the trade agreement, and I would assume that this has an effect on investments in projects or products, rather, that could be good business ideas. Do you agree with this, and what's the impact of this uncertainty?
I think that the impact is tremendous, and I think that it's certainly set up as a barrier. As I mentioned before, I had the opportunity to tour a mill in Chibougamau, Quebec last week, and with the Chantiers Group, and they have a sawmill, a traditional sawmill, but they also have a mass timber product mill that produces these mass timber beams and these walls and roofs and all sorts of really high-value products that they've taken the initiative and invested. That's one of the good news stories. But I think that there's a lot of opportunity out there throughout the country that I think now is hampered, that investment won't happen because of the uncertainty, because they don't know what their costs are going to be. They don't know how they're going to be able to. They don't want to take the risk if they're just going to be continued to be hammered in terms of the ability to earn a return. And so I think until we get something settled, it's we either have to, from a federal government standpoint, try and try and incentivize it for folks for companies to invest in such of products like mass timber, things of that nature, or get a deal so that the certainty is there so that they will naturally do it.
Bon, justement,
So we're talking about the agreement. In terms of the update on the lumber action plan that came to an end in 2020, have we advanced on this? In your opinion, what should really be added to this action plan? What's the priority?
Answer, sir.
Sorry?
A brief answer, if possible.
I think that, I think that the only answer right now is putting all our focus on getting a deal is to try and, as I mentioned, trying to produce some certainty by being able to get these companies to be able to reinvest in our industry.
Thank you very much. Mr. Desjardins, for 2.5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And again, thank you to the witnesses for being present in this important study and for your expertise, given the immense difficulty we are currently met with. We have serious challenges. There's no question about that. But the workers who are in these mills have extraordinary challenges. The cost of living continues to increase. We see this tariff threat, which will largely displace their ability to go to work, and the impacts to rural communities in particular. Canada's rural communities have taken a lot of hits, from natural disasters to recovery from those expenses to the cost of living and these tariffs that threaten their industry. It's quite serious. And so I really take the message away from today, especially from Mr. Bromley, that we need to act. We need to make this a priority, a national priority, for us to finally deal with a decades-long problem that has seen whether it was Conservatives that lost over 10,000 jobs in mills or the current Liberals that are proposing, without inaction, to lose even more. That's the real, credible, serious issue we're dealing with today. And so I think my question is relative to Mr. Bromley, if you can share us with some final words on what we can do to ensure that labor, particularly, is at the forefront of these discussions. The New Democrats are deeply committed to seeing our workers and our labor unions at the forefront of this plan, because I think that's largely what's been missing in the past. We've seen so many workers and labor unions taking the back seat so many times to these discussions that impact their lives. We want to organize a team of people here in Ottawa and across the country that can deal with this credible challenge by focusing our efforts on the impacts to workers, focusing on the expertise of workers, and bringing in unions to help lead that challenge. Do you agree that we need to see a whole of our country's approach, an all-Canada approach that's led by workers, led by unions, that would achieve, hopefully, a better outcome than what we've seen in the past?
I certainly agree and concur in your statement about labor being part of at the table, having a seat at the table. And I think that needs to happen. We certainly have a front row seat to the impacts of unfair agreements and the layoffs and the closures and whatnot. And we need to be part of that solution. I'll be honest with you, I negotiate agreements for a living. Now, do I negotiate massive trade agreements? No, I negotiate collective agreements. But nonetheless, we can bring a certain perspective to that table that has a human perspective. And I'll leave one last comment. In terms of I keep harkening back to the 06-17 deal that was, and it was a deal that gave us some certainty, but there was also a deal that came back where our companies that got back their money back in that deal, they invested where? In the south, largely in the southeastern United States, which they are now, Canfor and West Fraser are amongst the biggest lumber producers in the United States. So they're now on both sides of the border and enjoying the fruits of this disagreement, but in the United States, which is actually unfortunate.
Thank you. Mr. Williams, for 4 minutes, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to our witnesses for attending this very important meeting today. Mr. Dunn, I know you represent a lot of different businesses in the industry here in Canada, and we want to talk specifically about the economic impacts, what's happened with this industry in the last decade. Can you tell me what we've seen in terms of loss of jobs? We can talk about workers as a whole in plants. I know in Trenton, Ontario, I had Cascades that closed down last year, 148 workers there. Can you just give us a laydown of what's happened in the last 10 years as we haven't stood up to this industry, as tariffs have gone up and we've seen investment go south?
So I know that facility in Riding very well. They are a member of ours, and I mentioned earlier the need to attract investment into these facilities, and I think that's a really important key message to leave. In terms of impacts to employment, I mentioned earlier, since the early 2000s, employment in the forest industry in Ontario has fallen by half, from 80,000 direct jobs to 40,000 direct jobs currently. That's a combination of a number of economic factors. We've seen curtailments, we've seen rationalizations, consolidation in the industry going to the U.S., going to Uruguay, Paraguay, Brazil, Indonesia, not coming to Canada. So I think the focus on competitiveness is incredibly important. And the softwood lumber piece, the duties, if it's 25% on all forest products, that's another discussion. But the softwood lumber duties, in combination with all of these other economic factors, have led to significant declines in employment in Ontario.
So to that point, we know the famous announcement this week with President-elect Trump that 25% further tariffs on all goods in Canada. What will that mean to those 40,000 jobs in Ontario?
So we have 137,000 direct, indirect, and induced jobs. That's the number we like to use. I don't like to use Twitter or Truth Social as a litmus test for trade between our two countries. But if that does happen, if that threat is serious, it will have far-reaching and devastating impacts to those jobs.
In terms of the forest, one of the things I really loved about the forest sector is they plant trees. So I think forest sector in Canada plants 400 million trees a year plus. This government made an announcement to plant a couple billion trees and really haven't even touched that. So how important is it for the future of this industry to grow, not just even to see a decrease? What does that mean for workers, for jobs, for paychecks, in terms of having this industry grow and not be diminished?
It's essential. So we harvest 13.5 million cubic meters of timber in the province per year. The annual allowable cut is 28 million cubic meters. With that 13.5 million cubic meters, we employ 137,000 jobs. So, if we could raise the harvest, we can, encourage these investments, bring new capacity, more capacity online in Ontario. The benefits to northern, rural, and Indigenous communities in Ontario will be tremendous. And there are all kinds of opportunities. Finland is a really interesting case study in what you can do with a forest sector and advanced bioeconomy. They're a country a third of the size of Ontario, and they harvest 80 million cubic meters per year. They grow 120 million cubic meters per year. We grow about 40 million. So it's not that 28 is a ceiling. We can grow more trees. We can grow trees faster in Canada.
So last question would be...
You have 11 seconds.
For 11 seconds, on a scale of 1 to 10, how important is it to have a Prime Minister who will stand up to end the softwood lumber tariffs and to stand up for Ontario forest workers?
It's very important.
Thank you. Thank you very much. On to Mr. Sheehan, please.
Thank you very much, and I'll be sharing my time with Chandra. And I just wanted to make a statement because, and it's picking up on what the NDP member said, that this issue's been going on for quite some time, and the Conservatives are acting like Harper saved a bunch of jobs. But just from my personal experience in my backyard, St. Mary's Paper was closed when Stephen Harper was Prime Minister. White River was shuttered. And one of the things I just wanted to ask, our panelists in particular, because when a sawmill closes I was the city councillor, and also I worked for the Ministry of Training, Colleges, Universities, and we used to have these things called labor adjustment, community adjustments. And the people that led that, they'd make the point that when someone loses their job in small town Canada, say at a sawmill that closed while Harper was Prime Minister, and the two times were 2007 and 2011, not only do they lose their job, but they lose the equity in their homes, because that's like a lot of times the proverbial one horse industry. And when that closes, people also lose the equity. Whereas in a large city, it's still terrible when workers lose their job, but they can drive to another area easily. But someone in White River who's in between Thunder Bay and Sault Ste. Marie just can't drive down the street and pick up another job. So could you comment on the effects of these job losses throughout the 30-year period, in particular to small town Canada. Thank you.
I can go first if you'd like.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I can comment personally on how I've seen Canal Flats, British Columbia, just a little bit north where I live in the East Kootenays in southeastern British Columbia, lost their mill in 2015. Closed 180 direct jobs, small community in Canal Flats, about 1,000 people that live there. It's the proverbial one-horse town. There's one industry, and it closed. And those friends, family members had to then pick up and either move, which is difficult, as you mentioned, or they keep their home there, and they then have to commute. And so they commute either maybe in the north, up to the north, or to mines, hours away, or then they're away from their loved ones. They're working 1 weekend, 1 week out, or 2 weeks in or 2 weeks out. And what it does it eliminates your hockey coaches. It eliminates your community supports. Obviously the tax base for the actual community is devastated. So the effects are far, far reaching. And I think that sometimes they're not measured into the human impact, especially on families and folks when folks have to then travel to work instead of being home in their own beds every night.
Thank you, and I'll give the rest of the time to Chandra. Thank you very much for that. That's very insightful.
Thank you, Madam Chair. With that 50-second, Mr. Dunn, it was quite refreshing to listen to you. Quick question. I think in the history of this lumber dispute, did you mention 1794? So this has been going on. And why is the domestic industry not looked at the markets elsewhere, like Finland has done?
So across Canada, the industry is certainly looking at other markets, and they do ship to other markets. For Ontario, it's an issue of geography. It's not easily accessible by port, so it is a challenge. Our industry exports about $8 billion of forestry goods every year, and 97% of that goes to the United States. So I know some of our members have clients in Asian countries, but it's a very, very small amount and a very small dollar amount. I think there's opportunities to increase consumption domestically. We've talked about mass timber. There's really exciting developments in the energy space, biomaterial space, but you are never going to replace the impact of the American market for softwood lumber.
Thank you very much. Thank you to our witnesses. Very much appreciated the information. We will suspend for a moment while our other panel comes on. Thank you very much. Forest Industry Council.
Madame la Présidente,
Madam Speaker, or Madam Chair, rather.
mettez-vous juste un petit peu.
Just before we begin, in our previous panel, my colleague asked a question in English and was asked by the witness to repeat it, or rather, she asked it in French and was asked to repeat it in English. And I think it's important to remind ourselves and remind witnesses that they should always be wearing their earpieces because it's frustrating to hear that as a response.
Yes.
Although I'm learning French and trying my very, very best, I do respect the right to use that language of all members. And I think one of the ways that we can ensure that members are not penalized is if our chair, and it's not a challenge, but a suggestion, to stop the clock and then allow the member, like in the last case, I think that was the concern that our Liberal colleague had, Ms. Fortier. And I think when those instances arise, if we could stop the clock, and maybe our chair, you can use our discretion to then ask them to put the earpiece on, or ask them to, put the earpiece on.
Well, thank you very much. I think the idea best to do is at the very beginning of the meeting, ask to ensure that the witness, which he was told to put it on, but he chose not to, right? But in the future, I will start that to make sure that they have there so you don't lose time. Otherwise, I would stop the clock. Okay? So,
Merci.
Thank you.
Quebec Forest Industry Council, Jean-Francois Semray, President and Chief Executive Officer, and from Sinclair Group Forest Products Limited, Greg Stewart, President, both by video conference. Welcome to both of you, gentlemen. Mr. Semray, you have up to 5 minutes, please, to speak to the committee.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So the Quebec Forest Industry Council represents all the sawmills and the cardboard, paste and paper companies that produce the goods and equipment in this industry, as well as does research as well. We support 130,000 jobs in Quebec. We export about $12 billion, and we contribute to GDP in very high numbers. And about $6 billion in taxes, much of this going to the government, and it also supports the vitality of more than 900 communities in Quebec. So today we're here to talk about the fifth softwood lumber dispute that began November 25th, 2016. This was the coalition that tabled a petition. So this is the 9th year of this dispute. That's about $10 billion in deposits in Canada. And despite how long it's been, more than 8 years, that is, there has been no resolution to get back these deposits that were paid by Canadian and Quebec sawmills. And so despite everything that we have in NAFTA, all the provisions in CUSMA as well, despite the provisions that say that within 115 days there needs to be a ruling on a complaint and a final decision made. Well, nonetheless, today, after all these years, we have not received our money. And this is very harmful for the economy in Quebec and in Canada because companies have to spend money to produce lumber that is then exported to the U.S. And they have not received the revenue that is owed to them because it's being kept at the borders. 2018, 2019, 2020, and so on and so forth. When we take into account all these years, the total effect on liquidities is serious. And this is harmful for not only the economy, but our social safety net, because unfortunately, we don't have the means to maintain our current model. So there is a clear problem with the way that these panels are operating. Canada appointed panelists to participate in these hearings. But I think that we need to have more training in a school for these panelists because we still have not received a decision. And this is harmful for American consumers too, because they are not self-sufficient in terms of lumber, in terms of cardboard and paper. They need Canadian products. Now, the coalition could say, well, yes, well, we've implemented new factories, but 70% of Americans' needs are fulfilled by Canadian lumber, so they need our products. We just had Black Friday, and there was the Wood and Cardboard Festival. We need all this wrapping paper and boxes, for things like Black Friday. And we also saw during COVID the importance of the forest industry for basic needs in our society. So this is an issue in terms of jobs and communities and for Canadian consumers. And what I would add is that it is essential, rather, that we appoint panelists that are able to make decisions and support negotiations. So I'll be happy to answer any questions, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Word for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today. My name is Greg Stewart. I'm the president of Sinclair Group Forest Products, and I'm also the co-chair of the British Columbia Lumber Trade Council. Kurt Nickaday, the president of the BC Lumber Trade Council, presented at an earlier meeting. So my comments will be focused on Sinclair Group Forest Products and the impact of the unwarranted duties on our operations. Across Canada, the forest sector generates 382,000 jobs and contributes $25 billion to GDP. British Columbia is a key player, accounting for 40% of Canada's softwood lumber exports to the U.S. and supports approximately 100,000 jobs. Sinclair Group Forest Products is a third-generation company based in the central interior of British Columbia. We have 3 stud lumber sawmills and a pellet plant. Over our 62-year history, we have taken pride in working in the communities of Fort St. James, Vanderhoof, and Prince George. We have benefited and grown because of our long-term relationships with our First Nation partners. Sinclair has advanced social and environmental initiatives like the Prince George Downtown Renewable Energy System by deploying technology and partnering with local stakeholders. We employ 450 employees across our 5 operations, a small fraction of the federal and provincial forest sector total employment. However, Sinclair Group's experience is representative of small and medium-sized lumber operations across the country. With over $10 billion Canadian in cash deposits being held at the U.S. border, the Canadian industry is being harmed by the continued imposition of the unjustified duties. The duty payments for small and medium-sized enterprises in the forest sector have a significant impact on our ability to finance our operations. In addition to paying the duties, we are required to post bonds of at least 10% of the expected annual lumber duty payments. Without these bonds in place, Canadian companies are not able to ship into the United States. If we exceed the bond's limit, we cannot expand its capacity. Rather, we have to post a new additional bond. It is difficult to determine the exact amount required in the coming year, so it's not uncommon to post bonds 10 to 20% higher than is needed just to avoid saturating the bond. These bonds must remain in place until the border shipments are processed and liquidated. Given the ongoing legal proceedings associated with the softwood lumber dispute, and very clearly communicated by Mr. Samaray, no duties have been liquidated. Rather, the bonds continue to accumulate for small and medium-sized businesses. The financial burden is projected to increase dramatically in 2025 when duty rates are expected to rise from 14% to approximately 30%. This will threaten the viability of the Canadian lumber mills and significantly impact rural communities. This threatens the established partnerships and the continued economic, social, and environmental progress in forestry-dependent rural communities. For small and medium-sized lumber producers like Sinclair, the best possible outcome is being able to negotiate a settlement to the softwood lumber dispute. Reaching a long-term, desirable agreement needs to be the priority. However, it takes 2 parties to negotiate. Given the pending change in the United States government, it's unlikely the Canadian government will be able to negotiate a settlement before the imposition of higher duties in 2025. Given the significant impact that anticipated 30% duty will have on lumber mills and the communities, urgent federal support is needed to prevent mill closures and job losses. This support should include financing solutions such as a loan program for the punitive unwarranted duties, as well as federal programs through agencies like EDC that could be deployed to minimize the financial burden of the additive bonds for small and medium-sized companies. These programs should be prioritized ahead of the 2025 budget. Thank you again for allowing me to speak, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much. On to Mr. Zimmer for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, everybody, and good to have you back again, Greg. My questions will be for you. And this is from a press statement of the BC Council of Forest Industries, responds to latest mill closures, September 5th, 2024. COFI calls on British Columbia to work with the federal government to put in place a durable solution to the long-standing Canada-U.S. softwood lumber trade dispute. Urgent action is required to defend BC producers, workers, and communities from the disruptive impacts of these unfair and unwarranted tariffs. And you know, Greg, you just referred to them. After 9 years and 3 U.S. presidents, we still don't have a softwood lumber agreement. And because of that lack of action, we saw softwood lumber tariffs double this summer to 14.5%. And we have heard that it's going to go up another 11%. And Greg, you just said up to 30%. How have these softwood tariff increases affected forest families in BC?
Well, first and foremost, obviously, with the continued holding of the duties at the border, and it's a significant amount of money for small and medium-sized businesses, not to mention for large businesses, but obviously for a small and medium-sized business that doesn't have easy access to liquidity or the ability to finance operations, it's really prevented the ongoing investment in those communities, and this providing that increased certainty for workers and employees in those towns and in the companies.
Thanks, Greg. Another article from Biv Camphor's BC mill closures prompts call to stabilize timber supply. From the article, what's been limiting timber supply lately is government policies, he said, including a moratorium on logging old growth stands, 10-year transfers, a 30 by 30 conservation goal, and ecosystem-based land management. You have referred to the people in your mills, and I've heard you tell stories about your dad, and I've even heard from the people that used to work in the mills and still, that they remember your dad walking through the mill, getting to know them and their families. Like the Sinclair Group was very much is a family company. How devastating has this softwood lumber shutdown been for you, your business, and other businesses?
It's been significant in terms of the impact. You know, you referenced what is actually my grandfather. I'm still trying to keep up to the standard that he set for me in the mills. But the challenge that we have is that we are very community based, and we focus on our communities, and we believe our solutions are in our communities. The hard part with these duties is that they're being done by a foreign entity in the United States, and that has, it's out of our control, and it creates an incredible amount of uncertainty, and it prevents you from making long-term decisions for the operations because you don't know how long this is going to continue, and you don't have access to that cash flow.
But specifically, Greg, because I mean, you have to face these folks that used to work in mills, and I know you've been directly affected by mill closures. You have to face the families when you tell them, sorry, we don't have any more work for you. And I think that's what I'm looking for and I know it's impacted your family too, because you're the one that has to face them to tell them there's no more work for you. And I'd say even in Prince George, more at large with other mills that are beside you in that corridor that have closed already, mills that have worked and been operating for 50 years plus. The impacts to community can't be overstated here. I mean, we talk in dollars and business and cents and sort of the economic impacts of it, but there's a personal impact to the community. Just speak to that, Greg, if you would.
Absolutely. So, and I know in the earlier session of this meeting, there was a lot of discussion about communities as well. But one of the impacts on community is that when a decision like that is made, it is final. Unlike in a larger community, where there are other employment, there's other reasons to keep people in the community. Oftentimes, when a mill is closed, it is fatal for that community in that people have to move away and try and find jobs elsewhere. The likelihood of being able to reopen installed assets is very unlikely, and it makes it very difficult to bounce back from a closure decision.
Before by other members, I interviewed a bunch just in Fort St. John. There's nowhere else for these folks to go. My next question. This is from a mill manager in northeastern BC who wishes to remain anonymous, and he said, "The main reasons mills have had to close are political decisions. The trees are still there to support a vibrant, sustainable forest industry. However, access to those trees has been heavily restricted. The combined impact of these political decisions is estimated to have reduced the area available for harvesting by 50%. And based on where these areas are located, the impact on the annual allowable cut will be even greater than 50%. And my question, will there be any forestry jobs left in northeastern BC if the federal and provincial government's restrictions and closures continue?"
I'm not as familiar with northeastern BC, so I can't necessarily speak to the specifics of that.
In northern BC, let's include Prince George in this conversation.
You know, the reality of it is I believe that there is a future for forestry. I think that we're going to have to look at forestry a little bit differently, too. You know, forestry is a great way to combat climate change. It gives us an opportunity to combat and manage forest health so we can prevent wildfires. All of that relies on the forest industry being an active participant in managing on the land base. You know, and I think it takes a lot of dialogue and a lot of discussion between the various stakeholders with special interests on the land base to really understand and communicate how we can all work together to achieve the multivariable values on the land base.
Thank you very much, sir. Mr. Sidhu, please, for 6 minutes.
Thank you. Thanks, Madam Chair, and thanks to our witnesses for taking the time to be with us today. Canada has long-standing agreements with international partners, CPTPP, CETA, CUSMA, and about a dozen other trade agreements. Besides the North American market, where does your industry see the greatest potential? Maybe we can go to Mr. Semray.
Yes, well, it will be my pleasure answering the question. Well, first of all, we have to realize that Canadian companies are exporting, I would say, for Quebec, it is half of the production to the United States, which is 25% less than the normal manufacturing company. So, and we're already diversifying ourselves with when it gets to pulp and paper, cardboard, and so there's export that are done. But if we want to go somewhere else, if we want to develop market, it takes a long-term perspective. It takes some support, and it takes also certainty on the volumes you're gonna get. So seeing that all the rest of the world is going to the best market, which is the United States, I mean, having him next to us is a great advantage. So exporting 50% is already a diversified market that on a market which has paying the best price, and that is not self-sufficient. So there's some initiative and value-added products are exported, but it is not something that you do by night. And some program just like IFIT and refunding heavily IFIT, just like Finland is doing on their side, could be a way of having a long-term perspective, but it's certainly not something you do by night.
Perhaps I can hear from Mr. Stewart on this, about diversification into other markets and where you see the greatest potential.
Sure. And again, I would reflect the same comments. I mean, the United States is the single largest softwood lumber market available to us, and we're very fortunate to have them just south of our border. I think part of that, the answer to that really depends on the type of products that we are able to produce in the various regions and what the actual application for the species, the size of the lumber, and so forth. So in our case, we produce stud lumber at all three of our mills. And just for reference, stud lumber is the vertical member that goes into a wall panel. And we've intentionally moved in that way because of the size and profile of the logs in our area. But when you look at the markets available for stud lumber, it's really dependent on those markets that best are very similar to Canada in terms of the building codes they have, which is Canada, US, and Japan. Now, we also have value-added products, and so we produce pellets for sale. And historically, they had been going over to Europe, and more recently, they're now almost 100% going to Asia. And I think that, you know, value-added products does open up some other opportunities in terms of different markets that we potentially could explore. But the challenge is the volumes and being able to move volumes around. And just like Jean-Francois just mentioned, it does take time to develop those other markets and make sure that the transition is done effectively so as not to cause too much disruption.
And you spoke about Canadian needs here in Canada, and our government has an ambitious plan to build 3.9 million homes, working with provinces, municipalities, and industry within the next 10 years. How would that have an impact in terms of local lumber supplies? Do you have enough supply to provide to the local market as we build these homes across Canada?
I think fundamentally the answer to that is yes. If you look at even within British Columbia, if we were to fully utilize all of the wood that was produced here to build, mass timber, for example, we still have 95% at least of our wood that needs to be exported outside of the province of British Columbia. There is a significant amount of lumber available for those projects, and we should be able to support the housing construction. I think what's interesting in all of that is if you move to off-site type construction so that you can better deploy housing solutions, it may open up the opportunity for increased value-added use around engineered wood products use and in those off-site constructions because they rely so much on consistency of raw materials.
And 1 minute. So I'd like to hear from you guys on, we have a housing accelerator fund, which we heard from the leader of the opposition saying he wants to cancel. In my city of Brampton, that's going to be helping building close to 24,000 homes, working with the municipality, working with City Hall there. And I think the Housing Accelerator Fund is going to build thousands of units across Canada. What we're hearing from mayors, it's a vital fund to get houses built, get plans in place. What are your thoughts on our ambitious strategy to build more homes and how it can support local businesses like yourselves?
Well, if I may go on this one, I think it is important that the federal government and provincial government definitely have a role in order to make better use of forest product. It is a GHG neutral product that is also helping to reduce GHG emission. And on top of that, there's some regulation that could be done, just like City of Toronto, kind of putting a threshold on a maximum carbon footprint of each and every building in order to store embedded carbon into construction. So it's a win-win-win situation. So provincial, federal, and municipal government, they do have a critical role in making it happen.
Thank you very much. Mr. Savard-Tremblay for 6 minutes, please.
Oui, merci, Madame la Présidente. Merci.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to our witnesses. Mr. Samray, we've had 2 recent budget updates. Ottawa is removing GST temporarily. So this also will have an effect on you guys. And then there has been an announcement from Quebec that states that the government will be implementing an industry loan program to increase liquidity as we're waiting for these deposits to be redistributed. Could you comment on these 2 measures? Do you think that they're relevant and useful? Do you think that Ottawa should follow in the footsteps of Quebec in terms of this loan program? I think that your previous witnesses already talked about this. There is a liquidity problem related to these deposits, and it's a significant liquidity problem. So we have the minutes of the proceedings. Now, the government of Quebec has implemented a first measure that will bring us to the end of the fiscal year to offer $100 million of loans to increase liquidities and to allow companies to fund their lumber supply that they have to be harvesting, because there are certain periods where people are not able to go harvest. So I think that this is essential, and all representatives, I would say, believe that this needs to be a national measure. And 10% is great, but it's not enough when we look at the totals. And all this money is going back into the economy, so it's a positive thing. And for these loans, in your opinion, what would be the timelines that would be reasonable here? In your opinion, should we be distributing this money right away? Yes, I think it's a national priority. This would be immediately spent and would go back into the tax system, and this will support the entire industry. A year from now, we may have higher tariffs because of this dispute, but this liquidity will allow everyone to get through the upcoming year, and I think that this will really have a huge impact, and this is required from the government before the holidays. Okay, that's noted. Now, you know better than anyone else here the fact that the lumber dispute is long-standing and has been talked about in the news a lot in Quebec, in Canada, and the U.S. So unfortunately, this has not been resolved yet. I've already asked this question in the past, but I'd like to ask it to you as well. Would you agree with recognizing the uniqueness of Quebec's forestry regime? Now, this is something that has been established to comply with free trade rules. It was built that way. And so now the goal was that the price would be set by the market. We tabled a report, this committee, in November 2023 for a similar study, and we made a recommendation that you supported. Now, the Minister of Trade, in her response to this, said that the Government of Canada accepts this recommendation. Now, I don't think that they've distinguished things any further than that. Could you speak to your opinion on this? I think that the current system in Quebec was made to meet the needs of the Americans, as is the case for the market in Ontario and in BC. They are complying with the U.S.'s requirements. And so Quebec has done even more, and now the industry is, responding to the limits that have been set. Now, I think that the industry is asking itself the question now, do we need to keep doing this, or do more, rather, or should we stick to the bare minimum requirements? And this is knowing that there may be new tariffs. This is something that we need to reflect upon. As you've said, there have been a lot of sacrifices, there have been a lot of changes, but it didn't necessarily give us the results that we wanted. And Washington has to tell itself, really we need to clarify how these subsidies work for Washington. So the judge that was appointed by Trump in his last mandate made a decision on the Luker Bright case. And this was a fundamental decision for this litigation because it said that the Department of Trade, cannot interpret laws that were voted on by Congress as, if this is not clear, we can't simply say that Congress can't be wrong. The Supreme Court said that if this is not the intention of the judge, then you cannot interpret it as you wish. And so this created significant change, and I think that in upcoming years we will see that this is one of the elements that can help move us forward in this dispute. Thank you.
For 6 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for being present today. I'll start with Mr. Stewart. British Columbia, right next to Alberta, right next to us, and I can only imagine that you know both right across the border and right across the West, many, many families that deeply depend on softwood lumber and the very good jobs that it brings to many folks, particularly in rural parts of the West. So many jobs, in fact, that so many communities deeply rely on them. But for this committee's better attention and for, I think, the study report, would you be able to provide us the number of unionized workers within your business?
Sure. Within my business, there is one operation that is unionized, approximately 135 employees.
Very much. Monsieur Samre, same question.
Well, the Quebec Forest Industry Councils has closely 40 employees that are not unionized, but the industry is mostly unionized, starting from the paper mill, the cardboard. It is mostly unionized jobs that we're in the forest industry sector in Quebec.
Thank you very much. And what are the average hourly wage or salary of these workers, Mr. Stewart?
I think you can expect that people are making on average between 70 to 100,000 a year. Off the top of my head, I can't tell you specifically what the hourly wage rate would be.
Oh, that's okay, Mr. Semry.
Well, it's more or less the same thing. The more value added to the product there is, the more specific the job is, and the more knowledge it takes, the better the pay is there. But for sure that these level of income in rural community is just like $300,000 in Toronto.
And so in many ways, and I would agree, and I think you would agree, that these are good, well-paying jobs, and in many cases, good union jobs. Correct, Mr. Stewart?
Yeah, absolutely. They're great, well-paying jobs, and they lead to great livelihoods for families at large.
Mr. Samra, any additional information to that?
Well, it's definitely a well-paid job that support suppliers and support the entire communities. And now, being unionized or not doesn't make a difference. It is important jobs, and we also have some cooperative in Quebec that are doing a lot of work. And for them, they're the owners, so they have a different way of looking. They need to be unionized. For them, they are the owner, so they're doing the management as well. But yes, it is well-paid jobs that are important for vibrant communities.
Mm-hmm. No, thank you very much both for that. And I think considering the volatility of this, of course, unionized work is of paramount, I think, to many of the workers that are putting their blood, sweat, and tears into this industry. They need to know that in the instance where they lose their job, that of course their union would be there to protect them, and I appreciate both of you for answering those questions. The last time that the U.S. tariffs were imposed on your industry, just as recently, for example, in August, it went up to 14%. How many people were laid off in your associations or your businesses? Mr. Stewart?
Yeah, after the increase to 14%, there wasn't anyone laid off at that point. We had already made decisions where we've reduced one of our mills down to one shift previously due to the overall economic conditions, including the duties.
Wow. Well, first of all, thank you for that. I think that's an incredible feat that management and labor, of course, jointly can come to these kinds of decisions that protect good paying jobs, protect people on the shop floor. So I appreciate that answer, Mr. Samry.
Well, maybe around the same thing, same place that, I mean, fires, forest fires have a bigger impact than the tariff. And people are reducing the number of shifts and kind of sharing the job. And we need to realize that for family sawmills, just like Greg, I mean, some are there for the sixth generation. They know everyone. Their kids playing with everyone, so they better share the job. And there's a community management that is done, and I guess that's where we're at for the time being. It's a multi-factor: the forest fires, the tariffs, but on top of that, I would say delay in government support for solving the housing crisis, and this is reducing. This is lagging the demand where it should be to solve the social crisis.
Thank you both.
57 seconds.
57 seconds. Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you to the witnesses again. I think it's been clearly put that these jobs are very much worth defending. These jobs are critical to rural communities. They're critical to Indigenous communities. They're critical for provinces from Quebec all the way to British Columbia. I think that point's taken very clear from both of you today, and I think that will find itself certainly within our report. I will just conclude. I know I don't have enough time for a question, but I would like to just propose for my next round of questioning, which is a limited time I have. So if you can keep this question in mind by the time we come back around, I'd hope that we can have a fulsome response relative to your recommendations for how we move forward in this particular instance, in particular our relationship with premiers and other jurisdictions. That'll be my next question. Thank you.
Mr. Martel for 5 minutes.
Oui, merci, Madame la Présidente. Merci.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you to our witnesses for being with us today. It's very much appreciated. Mr. Samre, if we continue to find ourselves at a crossroads for these negotiations, what will the impact be on rural communities and workers that depend directly on the forestry industry? Always happy to see you again, Mr. Martel. Thank you. So it's a complex answer because the question isn't simple. It depends on the demand for the product. In a market where demand is higher than supply, it's the buyer that pays the tax, because if they want to buy the product, they have to pay. In the last 2 years, if demand is reduced because of government decisions, then in that case, with reduced demands, it's the producer that's going to pay the taxes. So that has an impact. So it depends on mortgage rates. If we have a support program for the industry, I think that it'll be the consumer that's paying the tax, and this will allow us to move through these tariff increases over the years. Mr. Samre, the absence of an agreement on softwood lumber over the past many years, as you know, has this weakened trust in the federal government amongst the forest industry? I would say that what's been weakened is their ability to move forward on projects and banks' willingness to lend money for these projects. This is very serious for the industry. The government is asking the other party to be present in these negotiations, and there have been a lot of negotiations and activity, but I think we need to settle this disagreement, and we need a solution that will be beneficial for Canada and for American consumers. So I'm sure that morale has been very much affected in the industry. If there's a 25% tariff that's implemented, what will be the urgent, tangible measures that the federal government needs to implement in order to protect jobs and support the forest industry in Quebec? Mr. Martel, I would say that today is November 27th. The government has 2 more months to move forward. That is the federal and provincial governments. I would say that we've received a clear message now. I don't think that we have the long-term solution that's requested by the parties. We have 2 more months to find a solution, and again, I think we have 2 months of intense work that needs to be done by the federal and provincial governments in order to prevent the implementation of these tariffs for the entire Canadian economy. So looking at 2023, we made 7 recommendations to resolve this softwood lumber dispute. Nevertheless, no tangible actions were implemented. Do you think this lack of action is a reflection of the government's priorities in terms of the forestry industry in Quebec? I can't speak on behalf of the government, but one thing's for sure, we're going to need to do more. The next government will need to take more action. We'll have to work with the embassy and the negotiation team and with the provinces in order to create relationships, work with the industry to show that the well-being of American consumers is supported by working with the lumber industry in Canada. We're always looking for solutions with them, and it's time to work with our network and be very present here. Thank you.
15 seconds left.
15, hein? C'est impossible pour moi dans 15 secondes.
Well, this will be impossible for me to ask a question in 15 seconds, so thank you very much, Mr. Summery.
Aria, please, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I thank the witnesses. Their answers and information they're providing is quite interesting. I'm glad to know that the average salary of people working in softwood lumber industry is between 70,000 to 100,000. As Mr. Sambers said, that is equal to almost 300,000 in Toronto. And I'm quite honest to be surprised with the frank answers. Though asked whether the latest duty going above 14% resulted in any layoffs. Both of you indicated that is not the case, but there's normal layoff due to forest fires and overall economic conditions. Mr. Stewart, I don't know if your company is public, were you profitable last year?
Sorry, can you just repeat the question?
Were you profitable last year? Is your company public?
No, my company is not public.
Okay.
We are at the same whims of the North American lumber industry at large, and the last year has not been a profitable year for very many, if any, lumber manufacturers.
And what percentage of, I know you also represent the BC trade body, what percentage of your members closed down their operations during the last year?
That's a difficult question to ask. I know that there's been a number of closures in the last year. I would suggest that there's been at least 4 members that would have had significant closures.
Okay, and in the earlier you did mention that you listened to the testimony of the first panel, where the Ontario Forest Industry Association chief executive mentioned that there's a long history between United States and Canada when it comes to softwood lumber. In fact, the year he mentioned was surprising to me, 1794. So this is not a surprise. And even the current one has been going on since 2017. This is the 5th round, if I'm not wrong, of the dispute. So given the track record of this industry relations with the United States, which is obviously a big, juicy market, why is that the BC industry, they are not looking towards exports to other Pacific countries? Ontario industry members, as mentioned by their group trade, they said that because Ontario is landlocked, it's not easy for them to transport to other markets elsewhere. But BC being on the coast, why is that your members have not tapped into the market elsewhere in the world?
Yeah, it's a good question. I wouldn't characterize that we haven't tapped into other areas of the world. I think that there are some certain challenges that come with the various species that we are harvesting and manufacturing, as well as the installed capacity that we have within our mills to produce certain products for certain regions. When I was talking earlier, I was talking specifically about our mills, where
So Stuart, I did know that you have been exporting pellets to Europe. That's a good thing. You're sending value-added products. But you said you mentioned the exports are being done, but it's so paltry compared to the total volume of sales that goes into the United States. The numbers I have is that to Japan about 200 million, to China about 100 million only, compared to the overall size of the industry. Quebec industries, if I'm not wrong, they are better in the value added products. Again, I'm quite surprised why BC industry is not adding value added products.
Again, I wouldn't agree with that characterization that we're not adding value add. There is different circumstances in BC than there would be in Quebec. We are currently developing our value.
I'm sorry to interrupt. I apologize because I got limited time. So what do you propose? You know that the government has been actively helping the softwood lumber industries in this dispute in the United States. What is that you're looking for in the deal? What do you propose?
In the deal that we have with like the final agreement, the settled agreement, I would suggest that we need to have we have to address the concerns of the U.S. while at the same time ensuring that we've got a good agreement that works for Canada at large. And so there are regional differences, and we'll have to consider that. I think we do have to consider the value added. I think the last deal did not adequately consider value added in terms of the effort that goes into those products and making sure that the duties reflect the additional work that's put into the products north of the border.
Thank you very much. And we have 4 minutes remaining. If you'd like to take 1 minute each, would that work? Okay, just 1 minute though. Okay, Mr. Savard-Tremblay.
Bon, je vais en avoir deux. On va prendre 30 secondes.
Okay, we'll take 30 seconds per question. So firstly, Mr. Samre, CUSMA will be reviewed soon. Do you think that we need to better outline the dispute resolution system so that it be 1 year maximum, so that we not have any issues on appointing these arbitrators? Yes. Okay, next question. You can maybe say more to this?
Non, ça c'était 30 secondes.
No, that was only 30 seconds.
Ask them offline. Mr. Desjardins.
Bon, ben, on va se parler.
Okay, I'll talk to you later.
Desjardins, please, 1 minute.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I've actually changed my question because Mr. Samra, you said something very shocking to me. I reviewed some of the transcript just now from a question you answered earlier, which was that forest fires cost your organization more than the tariffs. Is that what you said?
I've said that to the industry being totally stopped during summer and not being able to go in the forest for about 2 months, and after that being rushed to go to harvest the wood that is of lower quality in order to get a life to transform this wood instead of cutting green trees. It has a real great impact on the industry. Yes, this is what I'm saying.
Wow. Thank you very much for that answer.
Okay, I've got a question for Mr. Williams and then a question for Mr. Sidhu. 1 minute each.
Thank you, Mr. Stewart. For BC in the last decade, how many jobs have been lost? And the second question I have is, if a deal was made where we axe the carbon tax forever, does that help your industry become more competitive with the Americans?
So if I had to project this over the last decade, I think there's probably been about 40,000. I hope I get that number right. 40,000 jobs lost over the last decade for a variety of reasons. As far as forestry, forestry I think is Canada's best kept secret in terms of helping address climate change and doing so in a proactive way to provide products. And so I think that there's a real opportunity with wood products to combat and meet our climate needs.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Arya. 1 minute.
Mr. Samre, what do you propose? You know that the federal government, you and other industry bodies have been involved with the dispute for the last almost 6-7 years. What is that you propose? What do you like to see in the new deal?
Well, I'm not going to present it in a public hearing of the committee what is precisely what we're looking for, because I'm not negotiating in public. One thing for sure is getting the entire support of the Canadian government and being on a daily basis in Washington to get to an agreement that is a win-win situation. Americans needs our product. We are there. We have less production that we used to due to fires, due to biodiversity that we're taking seriously in Canada. So therefore, the wood of all expected just gone in smoke. So now we'll have less volume. So I guess that the American companies should be satisfied with this, but we need to find a long-term solution. And softwood lumber don't want to be the 60 years record of the chicken tax in between Europe and North America. So if there's a will, there's a way. There's a will on our side to negotiate, and we want to be there with the government in order to find a long-term deal with the United States.
Thank you very much. Thank you to all of the members and to our witnesses. On Monday, we will have one more hour of softwood, and we will then, the second hour will be the CBAM emissions study that we will start. Okay. Thank you very much. Move adjournment. 6:30.